Welcome to MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. I'm your host, Dan Mazer, and thank you for joining us for the panel that we call Comics Visual Literacy. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this panel, Hub Comics. Hub is an independent comic shop in Somerville's Union Square, and in a normal year, they would host our MICE preview night, the night before the show, where you can meet and mingle in an actual physical space with MICE's special guest cartoonists. But this is not a normal year. This is 2020, and we are just happy that we have found a way to partner with Hub to present this panel. We'd also like to thank all of our arts advocates. These are major contributors who help sustain MICE and allow the show to grow year after year. MICE is produced by the Boston Comics Arts Foundation, a 501c3 charitable organization that funds comics arts festivals, individual artists, and educational programming for the greater Boston community. If you like what we're doing here, please consider making a donation today by using the donate button in this session. Just so you know, this panel is being pre-recorded, so unfortunately you won't be able to ask direct questions. Also, we're streaming to the panel to our Facebook page, facebook.com/MICEXPO, MICXPO, for those audience members who would like to use the automatic closed captioning function that Facebook offers. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, Alison Wilgus. They are a Brooklyn-based best-selling writer, editor, and cartoonist who's been working in comics for over a decade. Their newest book, The Mars Challenge, is a nonfiction comic being published by First Second Books, illustrated by Wyatt Yates. Also, Alison co-hosts a great podcast on comics publishing called Graphic Novel TK. So check that out. Thank you, Alison. Wilgus.
Thank you, Dan.
Take it away.
Hello, everybody. We are here to talk about comics, which is like my favorite thing in the entire world. We're just going to look at Charlot's lovely cover while we talk about this. This is the Comics Visual Literacy panel. Basically, that means comics are often talked about like they're illustrated words or drawings that have some dialogue slapped on top of it. That is inaccurate. Comics is its own language and has its own conventions. So we've put together this really wonderful group of cartoonists to talk about the language of comics and perhaps improve your visual literacy. Perhaps we will learn something today. This is our second time doing this panel. We had a great time last year. I'm very excited for this year. Much as Dan's introduction and talking about Hub Comics is making me soul pine for being at MICE. I'm very sad. However, I'm very glad that we get to have this really wonderful group of people from all over the place with us today, which is really great. So I'm going to introduce everybody really quickly. We're going to start with Charlot Christensen, who is a Dublin-based illustrator, designer, and book author. As a Black artist, she often depicts underrepresented characters in an empowering way to help change their narratives. Some of her most renowned clients include HuffPost, Google, Penguin Random House, and the New York Times. Her debut graphic novel, What We Don't Talk About, is now out and is published by Avery Hill. Next, we're going to talk. We're all going to talk. Next, I'd like to introduce Trung Li Nuen, who is a Vietnamese-American comic book artist and storyteller from Minnesota. He was born in a refugee camp somewhere in the Philippine province of Palawan. Trung has contributed work for Oni Press, Boom Studios, and Image Comics, largely in the romance genre. His first original graphic novel, The Magic Fish, is due out October 13th, 2020 through Random House Graphic, an imprint of Penguin Random House. Next, we have Olivia Stevens, a graphic novelist and illustrator from Washington State. She has created work for a number of sites and publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, and Faya magazine of speculative fiction. Currently, Olivia is a 2019-2020 literary fellow for the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. Her debut graphic novel, Artie and the Wolf Moon, comes out from Lerner Books in fall of 2021. And finally, we have Jesse Lonergan, who was born in California, raised in Saudi Arabia and Vermont, and spent 2 years in Turkmenistan with the Peace Corps. His comics include Joe and Azat, All-Star, and Hedra. When he gets really excited or thinks something is really funny, he rubs his hands together like a villain in a cartoon. Perhaps we will see that today. So thank you all for being here. For those of you who weren't at the panel last year, basically the way this panel is organized is we're each going to take turns talking about, maybe not quite there yet. We're going to take turns talking about a couple of images that we've selected, not we, our esteemed panelists have selected to discuss. First, and a couple of pages that are from another artist, and then a couple of pages by themselves. And that's it. Time to start the panel. So first of all, we have Charlotte. Charlotte, would you like to tell us about why you picked these pages and why you think they're great?
Yeah, so I picked a page from Heart of Gold, which is a webcomic that by Ellie Baum and Viv Tanner. I think it's an absolutely amazing piece of work they put out there. And I'm particularly drawn to the way they use expressions. Color is a big part of their work. And just their pacing is incredible. And particularly this page is just, I'm very drawn to the way the blue colors are used to kind of dim the emotions, and then that really bright sort of pink color that kind of gives a sort of sense of tension in the page, and just the very sort of quiet panels as well, where there's a lot going on without anything being really said, and that's something that I kind of try to strive for a lot in my own work. I think that even just the way that they don't really use like very expressive bubbles. A lot of the bubbles are usually kind of standard, but I think it's sort of like it depends from artist to artist. But in their case, I think that the way they've sort of used their very strong expressions and the panels sort of speak for themselves, like the way that the words come here, it kind of feels like it's very expressed through the colors, and so the visual language of it is very strong. And I just think that it's very neat. It's very they don't really kind of, they use a very sort of linear kind of panel setup, but it doesn't really take away from like the expressive of the work. So some artists tend to kind of like really like really experiment with panels and such, whereas they kind of like keep very sort of to a sort of very kind of a structured kind of panel setup, which I quite like to do in my own work as well. So yeah, I think that's sort of some of the things I want to say anyway.
I really like how much of a sense of you get of these characters and their dynamic. Like, I have never read this comic. I don't know anything about this, but this is like a very evocative couple of pages.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful. And it's one thing they always sort of do with the two characters, that they always have very different lighting, kind of that sort of defines them throughout the whole story. So every page that it has usually a different kind of color theme. But Lion, which is the guy that you see in the first panel, he's always usually depicted with a very sort of bright lighting on him. And I think he sort of represents like the optimistic kind of person in the story, whereas oh my god, I had to like just remember their names. Donnan, I'm so bad at remembering names of characters, but Donnan is always sort of cast in shadow, and it just says so much about their personalities, and I just think it's so effective. Whereas in this page particularly, they're having an argument. I think it's the first time they're having an argument with each other. So Lion's sort of his sort of usual bright kind of colors have been really dimmed down, and to kind of really emphasize what he's feeling in this kind of particular moment. But even just in the I'm trying to remember sort of the little panel where he sort of says, I thought you wanted to help. Even though he's like really dimmed down, you really feel the kind of anger in it. I just think that's amazing. Hey, I mean, if I was doing it, I probably would have like, I don't know, put like a bright red light in the background or something. But I think that Ellie and Viv just so like in such a masterful way can really express a lot without actually like really sort of accentuating the colors. So yeah.
I've also never seen pink look so foreboding.
Yeah.
Like, it's so interesting how ominous this feels with this particular palette.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's yeah, they're just incredible at sort of using colors in such a way. Because I mean, you could have used red or other colors, but I think it goes really well with the blue, the sort of colder blue tones of the page. think the pink sort of really stands out, kind of screams out of you. So it really does feel very sort of aggressive.
All right, are you ready to talk about your own pages now?
No.
Never, but like, you have to.
Never. This is so good, and then my page is gonna look, yeah, no.
Whatever, I've read this book, it's great. All right.
Thank you.
Tell us about what you did here.
So, well, funny enough, there's an argument going on as well. That's not why I put them next to each other. I think that I was trying to kind of, like what Ellie and Viv does in their work, is I was trying to use color to sort of really express the emotions of the characters. And it was particularly important for me to find a way, because the whole book is very vibrant. And it's sort of towards the end, the colors really drained out. And so I was trying to do that with this particular page where you have Fry and Adam who are fighting with each other. And in the very final moment of the fight, the pink color is probably at its strongest. It's like this peak of her anger. And then it sort of dims out. And then on the other page, you sort of have her kind of packing up her stuff, leaving the door. And then I thought the idea of sort of like graying out the background, it also just helps sort of lead into the next page, but like it also sort of has like a kind of like a moment of like change. So I sort of, when I look at Ellie and Viv's work, I sort of think a lot about how can I use color in my own work to sort of express these things. So that's a really important thing for me. Unlike their work, I tend to kind of be a bit more playful with my bubbles. I tend to sort of like have very kind of spiky bubbles if they're shouting, or I tone them down if the conversation is sort of like if the anger's fizzling out. And I sort of, maybe it's like from, I don't know where I'm getting it from exactly, but I've always really found it really interesting how bubbles can be very expressive on their own. So that's something I play a lot around with. Don't think you necessarily have to, but so that's sort of what I do. Just like their work, I kind of tend to stick to a very kind of linear sort of way of putting my panels up. And I really do enjoy sort of having kind of borderless panels. I think in their work they were sort of borderless as well, and I quite like doing that with my work because I think a lot of my work doesn't really have a lot of line in it. So that's sort of where the kind of similarities are.
Yeah, I really like how I really do like how you use color in this. It's like you have this sort of buildup of energy, and then it's like it's draining out of them, like the way you feel after a fight. That kind of like the adrenaline seeping out of your body is kind of like the colors seeping out of the panels at the end of this. It works really well.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad that you're using different bubble shapes. Like there's no shame in a straightforward word balloon. We're all just trying to get through the day. But it's so great when people use balloons and when they really feel like they're very like a dynamic part of the page like this. Like it does, like it really emphasizes it's working with the dialogue and with the acting of the characters to really stress that this is a bad time. Like at a glance, you don't have to read the dialogue here to understand that they're having a fight and that it's a fight that's sort of escalating. And then again, like, and when you have her balloon here at the end and kind of, again, it's like the energy is sort of falling out. Mm-hmm. It's very evocative of what it's like to be in a fight like this.
Yeah, that's something I often really focus on, because I think for me personally, I mean, this is just obviously a stylistic approach, but I think that the comic has to work as a whole thing. So like that includes the bubbles for me anyway. So I think that's a very important thing. But I can also understand why like sticking to like a standard kind of like bubble, and you can still make it work. But I can also see like how that just takes the stress out as well, because I was redrawing some of these bubbles so many times. It's like, no, it doesn't look right. No, it doesn't look the right kind of angry bubble. So yeah, no, absolutely.
You're like the director coaching the bubble actors. Like, no.
Just once more with feeling.
Expressive. Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to say to wrap up your slide talk, or we can let you off the hook for a little while?
I guess just a bit, well, something that I definitely want to push for more is more quiet panels. My book was pretty text heavy, I felt. And one thing I just absolutely love about Heart of Gold is the quiet panels. There's so many of them, and it's just, there's so much going on in them. And I think I was trying to capture a bit of that on the last page here, where there's nothing being said, but you can still feel the story of what's happening and the sort of feelings of characters. And so that's something I definitely want to push for more. But yeah, that's me wrapping up.
No, it's great. I feel like the more of us are reading manga, I feel like there's a lot of that in manga, and it's nice to see more English language comics kind of leaning into that. It's great.
Yeah.
All right, you get to tap out for a while. We'll come back to you at the end of the panel. Next, Trung, please tell us about these gorgeous. I've never seen this illustrator before. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Sure. Okay, so this illustrator is Gennady Novozilov, and he is a Russian illustrator and I think animation artist. He was not someone that I'd ever heard of kind of in the West end of the hemisphere, but like he does a lot of really kind of popular Russian folktales and fairy tales, and these two images are from an epic poem called Ruslan and Ludmila, which is, I think it's a romantic poem. It's by Alexander Pushkin, and it's been sort of adapted over and over into operas and all sorts of different things. And so Novozilov did a lot of work in he existed a little bit in our lifetime. He died in 2007, and so he did a lot of film work in Russian animation for a little while. And I think these are either part of a storybook, but they also come with a lot of kind of concept art for the characters as well. And his work looks nothing like my work at all, but I find that it's really helpful to look at a lot of work that uses visual language a lot differently than what, as I myself as an artist like to draw, because everything that we see informs the way that we read different images all of the time. And I know that there's a little bit of, like we discussed at the very beginning of the panel, is that there is this distinction to be made between an illustrated book and a comic book. And the misapprehension that a lot of people have is that a comic book is an illustrated book. It has words, it has pictures, they happen to both be there at the same time, and they're totally separate things. And they are kind of made like at different points in time, but I think they really inform each other in ways that are distinct and necessarily particular enough that it deserves some discussion. So the distinction that I make with illustrated books, like children's storybooks, is that usually the images and the text supplement each other in some way, but they are distinct. And in comic books, it's totally different because the images and the text don't supplement each other. They are the same thing. You read them all at the same time. Comics is its own visual orthography, and you learn how to read each comic book as you go along, because drawing and writing a comic book is kind of like writing a letter in your own handwriting. You kind of have to figure out what all the marks mean. And so it's this constant process of learning how to read. And so looking at an image visually and trying to dissect all the things that make it work and all of the things that it implies really helps you get better at reading comics. It helps you get better at, looking at advertisements and trying to figure out like what images are being fabricated in order to make you think a certain way. It makes you a much more critical visual viewer. And so I'm very excited about this panel because this is really important to me. So I chose these images because I wanted to talk about something really mundane about visual storytelling that people don't really like to talk about. It's like, so I'm trying to always, with my work, figure out how to convey weight and movement and gravity without the use of action lines, because my work tends to come from turn of the century children's book illustrations. It doesn't look like a lot of comic books that are being produced right now. It's not really the imagery that you'd think of when you think of a comic book, but I am very proud of the fact that I make comic books. And so I am trying to incorporate a lot of different visual traditions together. So the ways that you, and I guess this artist in particular, conveys weight and movement in their images, in his images, has a lot to do with the ways that lines are structured and how they are kind of put up against, juxtaposed against soft lines. And so the way that I've found that I could imply movement in my work is through like the use of like a noodly loopy hair, because that can imply like a lot of movement, but it doesn't mean anything unless you put it up against something that's really rigid. And so if you have like a central figure in your image that's really static looking, and then everything around it is sort of a little bit chaotic somehow, if there's a lot of like circular movement, or even if everything else is very angled, if those angles are either imprecise or if they're a little bit more chaotically oriented, you give the viewer a sense of motion or a sense of time passing even, which is really interesting. And Novozilov does this in two very different ways in these images. And so the first image is the hero of the story kind of, he's on his horse and he's trudging through a battlefield, and you get the sense that a battle has happened. I'm not going to talk about the palette very much because I don't use a lot of color in my work, but the palette is really beautiful, and I really love the way that he implies this sort of sunset in this image of the night. And I love the way that the knight character, the central figure that you're sort of drawn to, is way off to the side, and he's very rigid. He's like this straight vertical figure, and we're looking at him dead on, sitting on his horse. And so it accentuates the way that he's like this very sturdy figure. And everything else is sort of scattered and very haphazardous. All of the kind of softer lines are sort of wrapped around these kind of different spears that are making all sorts of different tangents all over the page. And so you get a sense that he's standing apart from this thing that once has already happened. And then and then the bird also just sort of like gives you the sense that like there's a stillness in the air as well, because the bird also has a very straight, like it has a strong horizontal orientation, and the wings kind of occupy a space in the air that's very strongly diagonal. But even that looks much more rigid and much more centered than the chaos that's going on the ground. And then the other image is the kind of the heroine of the story, and she's looking in the mirror. And I thought this was really interesting because one thing that I like to do in comics is to use things that are not panels as panels. And that's something that you can get a lot of in children's book illustrations, because they do a lot of really beautiful and inventive things with imagery. If you're making a children's book illustration, oftentimes the figures are going to inform where the text will go later. And so you can kind of see that like the central figure herself is kind of sort of the paneling for the image that's next to her, which is also an image of her. And so it gives you this sense of like, okay, this is a whole character study. We're going to tell you a little about this figure and how she lives and this world that she occupies, kind of all in one image. And she is going to be her own framing device, which I find to be really fascinating.
Thank you.
I took so few breaths.
No, it's great. I love it. No, this is so different than what other people picked out. But I was wondering where you were going with this. Thank you, Trung. This is very interesting. Are you ready to talk about your own stuff?
Yes, sure.
Because I think that you're right. This is a very good thing to contrast with your own work, which is doing some similar stuff.
Yeah. And so of course, like my work looks super, super different. My visual priorities are also very different. I work in a clear line style. And so everything that I do is very line heavy. You don't get any, like it's very, like the lines are also very rigid. There's not a lot of line quality and variation either. And so it lacks that lushness that Novozilov's work has. But I think it's valuable to look at his work in terms of weight and gravity, because that's kind of what I try to do in this work as well. And so I tried my very best to make the figure, the Cinderella figure in these panels very kind of rigid. And when she's being lifted off the ground, that's the only moment where she kind of has like a diagonal kind of movement to her. And so you get the sense that like in the very first panel where you see her kind of figure, she's going to be very straight and kind of sturdy, but there's starting to be the sense that like there's movement happening, there's change and there's transformation, because the fabric is kind of wrapping all around her, and it looks a little bit like smoke at first, and then it becomes like this kind of fabric thing, and then as it fully wraps itself around her, she gets lifted off the ground and she becomes kind of a part of all of the movement. And so one of the things that I kind of found, like one cheat code in working in a clear line style when you're trying to imply movement and weight, is you can use fabric and you can use hair to imply movement, because they will move at different rates than like a solid figure. And that's something that you kind of like pick up as you know, if you watch cartoons.
It's very animator of you. I was just gonna say that kind of secondary animation type thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I tend to like to do with comics as well is that the word balloons are like an integral part of the image. They're an integral part of the composition. And so you can't read them apart from the image. I'm not just going to slap them on top of the drawing that I've done. They're like I've integrated them into the drawing as best as I can in order to also imply a little bit of loopy movement. And so that's kind of what I'm doing in the second page that's up on the screen.
What I really appreciate about this also is like, I think that a lot of your elements, particularly on the spread, are it's like the character and the action are very much integrated with the comics language, if that makes any sense. Like you're playing with the panels, you're playing with the word balloons, which is nice. Like I think that there's a way that there's an argument to be made for keeping those things invisible. Mm-hmm. Like that's the framework you're building your comics house on. And it's nice when people sort of, instead of trying to make them as invisible as possible, instead they're like, no, I'm just going to play with this. Like I'm going to integrate this into what I'm doing. So, and this also is very nice follow-up from what Charlotte was talking about earlier. So, all right.
Yay.
All right. Are you good?
Yes, I'm all good.
Good to take a break for a while?
Yes, I'm breathing again. This is good.
All right. Next. I'm so glad that you picked this page. I was like, do you want another page? You're like, no, just this page. And like, that's true. This one pretty much stands on its own.
I kind of have to pick a page from EK because in every interview I do, I'm like, what's your influence? EK Weaver. So I have to keep it consistent. So TJ and Amal was like a major influence on me, especially in high school when I shouldn't have been reading it. And especially when it came to just subject matter, naturalistic dialogue, execution of the art style, all of that influenced me so much. So I just had to do a little page study. So this is, I think it's page 2 of the book. And
oh, wow. It's right from the beginning. I forgot.
Yeah, I was like gonna flip through everything. And then I hit page 2. I'm like, no, we're good. So this is page 2, immediately after this character Amal has come out to his family, ended his arranged engagement, and been promptly disowned. And he's getting into his car to leave and just go anywhere else. And so I wanted to talk about a few of the aspects here as far as layout. The repetition of this one panel's composition on the page, I feel, is just so successful in kind of freezing time and allowing us to feel that moment of the character's contemplation where he's just destroyed his entire life and you need 3 beats to get through it. And that repetition also allows us to focus on what is changing in the scene. And so you notice that the only thing actually changing is the character's physicality. And so therefore the audience is then able to focus on just the movements, the character acting, his mannerisms. And I feel like that is something that also helps to humanize a character to people in a way that dialogue can't. Because without character acting, it's just pretty people saying things to each other. And, you know, it's the mannerisms that makes someone more real to us. And so we're witnessing a somber human moment, and it takes up 3/4 of the page just to convey the emotional weight of him putting his head on the wheel and then coming back up. And so as far as real estate goes, that's heavy. And so something else I want to talk about was just kind of the execution of the art and the toning in this page. And so this light gray wash that's just completely depressing. So like a light gray wash that surrounds the character, and the only bits of white are his shirt and like the shadows on his face and the black of his hair. And so I feel like the toning of the page also kind of draws us into what really matters. It's not really about him getting in the car. It's about him and what he is feeling in that moment. And another thing with the execution of this comic that I feel really serves the story and serves this character is the combination of pencil and ink working together in this comic. That really like blew my mind when I first started reading this comic, because I had always been taught like you do your pencils and then you do your inks and you erase all of that hard work underneath, and then you move on to making it as clean as possible. And so when I first encountered this story, when I was starting to draw, I was like, oh, you can keep that stuff in. You can allow that human touch to reach all the way to the final page. And so I feel like the pencil and ink working together in this comic brings a layer of human touch and emotion to the story that you wouldn't otherwise get if this was just a very clean, like digitally inked page. The sketchiness kind of holds that fluidity and sense of possibility that a lot of us can lose when we're like drawing, when we take a drawing from the sketch to the ink and we're like, oh, this doesn't feel as alive as it did when I first drew it. And so I feel like EK here takes the best of both worlds, the looseness of sketch and the clarity of ink, especially when she uses it to kind of emphasize the character in a panel. So it just feels like a very intimate artwork where the evidence of the human touch is adding to how much we relate and empathize with the characters. And I love like really clean, crisp art too. But I think, again, that if she had approached this work specifically with like a very clean approach, then it kind of would have detracted from like the emotional core of the story. And so it feels like a conscious choice that was made like very well in service to the message of the story and the tone and everything.
You know, the efficiency of this page is just incredible. It's 4 panels. And what I especially love is between the second panel and the fourth panel, he goes from like very different moods that are like connected to each other, but sort of goes from like, I can't believe I just did that to, all right, well, now what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's like a pretty big emotional turn, but it works. And then he goes and makes a series of very stupid decisions, which then frame the rest of this really excellent book. Oh, Mal, it's going to be fun, baby. Just like hang out. Hang on another few hundred pages.
Hang on for 400 pages and you'll be fine.
All right, now to talk about your comic. And by the way, I just noticed that you have some really great speed lines, like kind of centering on you because of your ceiling.
Oh,
it's very comics of you. Yeah, there you go.
Edit that out anyway. Yeah, so this is old work from 2017 from my old webcomic that has fallen into disrepair since I've started working on my published work. It was a comic called Alone, is a comic, it's not dead yet. And Alone is largely black and white, and I have little red pops of color that tend to mean different things or draw attention to certain details, but usually the red is linked to the feeling of like a deep emotion. And in these pages, our main character, Jack, he just left a very rough, bad argument with his girlfriend late at night. And so he goes to the grocery store and passes the liquor section before buying milk and cigarettes. And that's important because Jack is a recovered alcoholic, and I wanted to spend an appropriate amount of time on this moment and his choice to walk away. And so as far as page real estate goes, there's like another page actually in between these two, which makes it 3 pages where he's just standing in an aisle doing nothing. So 2 panels getting into the store, 3 pages just getting out of one aisle, and then 2 panels to get cigarettes and leave. And I wanted to do that just to give the proper emotional weight to who he is and the decisions that he isn't vocalizing in any way, but that you have to grasp from the context of the rest of the story. So I also wanted to focus on his mannerisms leading up to his decision to walk away, to kind of humanize him as a man with issues that he has to work through even when he goes to the grocery store. And sketchiness is kind of a quality that I try to convey even in my inks. And I think I get that from loving work like EK so much, where I'm not trying to be clean in my work as much as I'm trying to achieve clarity in what's happening, both physically and emotionally, and in what the characters are feeling. And so I try to lean more into organic ink work, and there's a lot of texture that I leave behind to kind of evoke the emotion behind things. And I think the pop of red here on the cigarettes was just kind of bringing the red back because before these pages, the red kind of leaves as they're having this argument because they're both kind of draining themselves. And so it represents a lot in the story, from love to music to just intense feelings about each other. And so I kind of wanted to bring it back just to channel like the intense feeling of comfort that he needs to get from his second choice of vice. So he's channeling his fraught emotions into seeking comfort in a flawed but not entirely self-destructive way, the way he usually would. And yeah.
And this connects back to what we were talking about with Charlotte's comic, like that similar sense of like how you're using the presence or removal of saturation and color in your comic to sort of show the ebb and flow of the emotions between the characters. Like your execution is very different, but the sort of thing that you're trying to do is sort of similar in a way it's for those of you watching the panel, people did not coordinate with each other what panels they were going to stick. So it's sort of nice. I feel like we're all sort of in conversation with each other just by happy accident, which is just nice. It's almost like comics are a complicated medium that we're all trying to do the best we can with.
Yeah.
I'm glad you picked these pages out. This is a great comic. No pressure. I do hope you finish it eventually.
Me too.
Also, the other thing I was going to say is I'm glad you brought up also that there's even another page missing from this, because I think that one of the big things about comics is time is such an interesting concept, both like the literal time of how, like when things are happening and how much time is passing, but also sort of the time the reader is spending with it, like the perception of importance that goes with that. It's like we were talking about earlier, I think Charlotte was talking about things like silent panels. There's the question of like, is the reader going to read them too fast? Like, how can I make the reader linger on this panel? How can I add gravity to this? You similarly have silent panels here. Like, I feel like for both of you, actually, those had a lot of detail in the backgrounds. They weren't just like a character by themselves. There's a lot of stuff to look at, and I feel like that keeps the reader looking at them a little bit longer and makes them feel longer than they otherwise. It's interesting. On the other hand, sometimes people will have just like a face with no background, and that will feel timeless. It's very like intuitive, that sense of how to make something feel important.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else, or are you ready to kick this over to Jesse and make him be on the podium for a while?
I'm good.
Thank you. All right, Jesse, your time has come. Please tell us about Mobius.
My head is full of ideas. I've heard so many different thoughts. So I chose this Mobius spread. I think everybody knows who Mobius is. He's a French comic book artist, started in the 50s and basically went until he died in 2012. And this is from a comic called Arzak that he did in the 1970s. And this is like the excuse me, the third sort of Arzak story that he did, and it's my favorite one. And I don't know if this relates to anything anyone else is talking about, but like one of the things that I really like about this story and a lot of like my experience with Mobius is that he's very hard to find in English, or very expensive to find in English. And so a lot of like most of the editions I have are Italian editions or Spanish editions that I can't actually read. But then I have gotten some English ones and I'm always a little bit disappointed by them. And so I feel like with his art, one of the things that he does, it's sort of like the people talk about how watching movies isn't as good as reading the book, because when you read the book, your mind creates the pictures and fills in the images. And I kind of feel like the reverse is also true, where when you just look at a picture, your mind can sort of fill in the story. And I find this a lot with like old sci-fi book covers, which I always think are amazing. But then I start reading the book and I'm not so amazed. And so this story, I feel, has that quality of it gives you these like little pieces, but not that much. But his art is at such like it's kind of a ridiculous level of detail and draftsmanship involved in it. And so I feel like you are left sort of creating the story outside of whatever it is you're looking at. And so in this one, it's this sort of main character who's the center of the middle panel on the left. And he goes to a temple. Inside the temple is like a stadium. There are these green people. The green people start attacking him. He goes inside this room in the temple. Inside the room, he starts working on this machine, which cures this pterodactyl. And I don't really know what it means, but I like how like the art sort of pushes so like strongly that it's sort of like it has me asking questions, and it has me sort of more actively involved in like what the narrative is. While a lot of times with comics, I feel they can be pretty like didactic and like this is the narrative. And so I like the sort of ambiguity of the story. And I also like, you know, a lot of sort of the things he's doing, like using color to define the spaces, where you have these sort of like yellows for this outside, this red for this inside, and then this blue for this other world. So that's why I chose this page.
The other thing I really like about this is I feel like it illustrates something that's so important to comics, which is like choosing your battles. Like there's parts of this that are so detailed, and he's clearly spent so much time on. But there's a lot of this where he's very good at using like hatching and color to sort of suggest detail. But if you actually look at it, there's not very much there. There's just an efficiency, like the sort of, especially on that third panel on the left-hand page, where if you actually look at it, it's pretty simple, but that room feels more complicated than it actually is if you look at it closely, which is perfect because it's comic. Like you can look at this for like 3 seconds, you register the important details. Oh, there's a computer. Oh, they're coming into the door, and then you move on to the next panel. And he's not spending a lot of time on something that you're not going to notice, which is very different than some of his illustrations I've seen that are much more like wall-to-wall insane bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, that's it. It's just, it's interesting. It's a good illustration. Even Mobius knows when to be lazy, which I appreciate.
Well, I think oftentimes with like comics and like specifically this is more just the art end. It's like a decision of what to leave out more than what you put in. It's like how much is too much. And I think when comics are working really well, it's kind of this like perfect amount of enough and not too much. So yeah.
All right. You ready to talk about your own stuff?
I guess so.
Sorry, everybody else did it. It's your turn.
This is a page from a book that's coming out in November called Planet Paradise. And basically this passenger and a captain have crash landed on an alien planet, and they have to survive. And in this spread, basically like the rescue ship has arrived, but no one is coming out of the rescue ship because the rescuer is really interested in the in-flight entertainment and is just wants to finish his show basically before he comes out to save the people. And I think I don't know exactly why I chose this page, but one of the things I like is that it's a 2-page spread, but it's not a 2-page spread. You know, it's like the image carries across, but it's not, but it could be broken up into individual pages. And I also feel like looking at it, like the color, which is used to sort of distinguish this cave that's within this sort of mountainside, and sort of that the panels are creating this mountain, but then you're also seeing inside the mountain at the same time. And I also sort of feel like there's like this thing going on with time in this, in that they're waiting for a rescue, waiting for something to happen. And so there's all these panels, but I think almost all the panels could be read as like the same moment, right? Except for the last 2. Basically, all of that could be seen as the exact same moment in time. But because it's broken up into panels, it's broken up, creating sort of space. Space starts to equal time. And that sort of struck me when I looked at this. I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. And then I also like that space equals time, but then using the sort of binocular icon kind of makes that icon represents the distance. And so space is an equaling distance, space is equaling time, and distance is equal to an icon. And so it's using these different ways of conveying information to get across this idea of sort of waiting for something to happen.
And this is coming back to what Trung was talking about earlier, both about different ways to sort of use the what's going on in the thing to create frames, like using the binoculars to be that first panel. And also, you know, we were talking about earlier about ways to sort of integrate the form of the comic into the artwork in different ways. Like you've obviously, the way you've chunked up the background here is drawing attention to the paneling in a way that it would normally be invisible. That's really interesting. I think it works really well. And again, you're actually doing a similar thing to Mobius where you're sort of like picking your battles with, you're doing a lot of hatching to kind of make, add the suggestion of complexity, which the thing, I always feel like I'm ragging on people when I say that, but I'm not at all. It's so smart, right? Like because if you had drawn this exact same thing that didn't have this texture, it would feel completely different.
Right, yeah.
And Trung, you similarly, like, I feel like all of you are sort of adding that texture and complexity to your work in slightly different ways. And it's so neat that you all have such different styles and ways that you're sort of solving that problem of like balancing the necessity of simplicity, because it's a comic and we only are on this earth for so many years. But I want it to feel complete. And it's nice to have seen all the different ways of doing this. It really emphasizes how there's no right way to do any of this. We're all making it up as we go along.
Damn Skippy.
Tissy, thank you so much. So I guess at this point I would love to hear if anybody has any kind of final thoughts. I don't know if there's another slide in this presentation. There is not. Excuse me, people at home. I'm going to zoom in real fast, back to the beginning of this because I didn't plan. There we go. Just going to look at this for the rest of the panel. So now that everybody has had their turn, is there anything else anybody wants to kind of final thoughts or come back around to before we wrap up our discussion of the form of comics for the day? The answer can be no. I just want to give the opportunity.
I just want an opportunity to say that all you guys' work are just incredible. Like, I just feel like I'm learning so much from just seeing how every single one of you are approaching comics, and from panels to the way you were talking about depth and weight, things I hadn't really considered. So there's loads that I'll take from this and be like, okay, I need to think about all these things as well. So just want to say that. Just incredible work.
Yeah, I genuinely feel like I went back to art school for a second there, except I enjoyed it a lot more this time.
Yeah, I think it's great because comics is such a solitary medium. It isn't like animation or where you have a whole bunch of people who are working together. Like most of us either do our work completely by ourselves, or we have just a handful of people that we're working with. And so we spend a lot of time in our own heads. And I'm so glad that we could all talk with each other about this. I think that there can be this sort of pressure most of the time when we're talking about our comics, we're talking to a general audience and we feel like we shouldn't get too technical. No, yeah. Sorry, Shelley told me I could swear, but I got subconscious the last time. No, friends, this is the whole point of this panel is to get technical. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming and talking with me about comics today. I feel like genuinely energized with the power of comics. My day job is editing other people's comics, and the most wonderful thing about it is to get to talk to people about their work in depth, because it's literally my job, and also it's their comic, so in theory they're interested. So this is great. Yeah, no, you all are wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you for making the time to come and talk today. I really sincerely, forget the audience, I appreciate it. This has been wonderful for me personally, but also our audience who took the time to come and watch this today. Thank you so much for joining us. we are all on the internet. Our work is all available. Please politely feel free to tell people how amazing they were on this panel. Only compliments. That is all that is allowed. And don't make the rules. That's just how it works. And please go and buy all their amazing books because they're all real good. Yes, Olivia?
Just because today is October 6th and a very important day, I just wanted to remind everyone out there that they need to buy Twins by Varian Johnson and Shannon Wright. It's available wherever you find books, and it's published by Scholastic, and it's out today. Love you, Shannon.
I forgot. Thank you. I've heard so
Awesome.
much, for real, I've heard so much about that book. I'm genuinely
I
so
was
looking
gonna
forward.
hold this up, but it's backwards. This says
Oh.
buy Twins.
No, it's only backwards for you. It works for us.
Oh,
Yeah, hold it up again. Let us all see.
Yeah,
buy
awesome.
Twins today.
Good. Thanks for telling me. I tried to buy that like 3 months ago, and I was like, I can't buy it. Why?
Immediately get off this
No.
call. Go buy a book.
Exactly.
This book is sponsored by Twins. No, this panel. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming. And I know you're all going to want to buy all of these great creators' books from the panel. You can buy them from Paper Asylum, which is a local independent comic shop. You can find links on our website by clicking the button on your screen. This session is part of the Month of Mice, a month of free comics programming, including panel discussions and workshops. And you may want to check out our live Iron Cartoonist drawing tournament. Always a favorite at Mice. Round 1 is later today at 7 p.m. For a full list of sessions, visit miceexpo.org. That's MICEXPO.org, or click that button again.